Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We have reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. This week, the topic is something a little bit near and dear to my heart, and that is stage to screen adaptations. I grew up doing theater, going to the theater, absolutely adoring all things stage play-y, whether it be classic titles from like Shakespeare and Johnson or musical theater. I really, really loved all of it. And I think there's a really specific art to film adaptations of stage plays because while obviously performance all has a bit of a connection to each other, there's still like very distinct differences between performance on stage versus screen. So in order to intelligently translate and transition those things, it takes a lot of nuance and work. And to have a really, really solid, interesting, entertaining screen adaptation of a stage work is so cool to watch. So I've put together this little list of about 6 titles, all very, very different themes, all very, very different styles of acting, and hopefully you will find these interesting. Whether or not you're a big fan of theater work or you just like a really, really solid movie, I think you'll find something within these. As always, these titles are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card, and all of them are also available digitally via our 3 video services, which are CleveNet's Overdrive, Hoopla Digital, and Canopy. If none of these titles are of interest to you, make sure you still visit those video services because they have thousands upon thousands of options there. You will, I guarantee it, find something that you're interested in. Okay, so without any further ado, I am going to jump right into those recs. Okay, my first recommendation is from CleveNet's Overdrive, and that is for the classic Shakespearean history, Julius Caesar. Now, the adaptation I'm talking about is the 1953 work, and you know, for the era, especially when you think about that time period, this is a shockingly faithful adaptation of the original source material. I mean, there are almost no scene cuts, which happened a ton back in that particular day. You don't have weird additional scenes shoved in there, which you see a lot of even today. You have pretty traditional, straightforward interpretations of character and motivation. You have beautiful, beautiful production value. I mean, 1950s Hollywood had some incredible set designers, and they did a really, really phenomenal job with this. For people who are not super familiar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar does tell the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar. Your central characters are Brutus, who is one of Caesar's closest, dearest, most loyal friends. This group of conniving, vicious senators led by Cassius somehow manage to get into the psyche of Brutus and convince him to betray Caesar. Again, this is one of Caesar's closest, dearest confidants and friends, and by making Brutus believe that Caesar is going to do something terrible for his countrymen, they are able to manipulate him into being part of this assassination plot. It is not a spoiler to reveal that, yes, the assassination plot is successful, because the reality is that the main crux of this story is the whole concept of just betrayal in general. You have Brutus, who tries to convince his fellow countrymen that he did this, he was part of this plot for the good of the people. And just when you think everyone is going to fall in line, Mark Antony shows up and manages to turn the tide and the opinion of that crowd, and move things more towards revenge for the fallen Caesar. Now, this particular adaptation has an insane cast. I mean, James Mason plays Brutus. James Mason is always really good at playing these like larger than life characters. He has a very particular acting style, which I do think fits with this interpretation of Shakespearean character. It's a little bit presentational rather than natural. You have the always brilliant John Gielgud playing Cassius, and if you're going to have a Shakespearean villain, it better be played by a British actor who is classically trained in this particular field, because rather than, chewing on the scenery, he is just living in that character, and he knows how to play more performative roles without having it be too over the top, without having it be too separate, if that makes any sense. Julius Caesar is played by Lewis Calhern. And then the big sort of side-eye of performance is Mark Antony, played by the incredible Marlon Brando. Except, so when I think of Marlon Brando, I always think of very method style acting, very Strasberg, very Stalinowski. You're definitely looking at people who are in the moment, which is not something I think of when I think of this particular style of Shakespeare. But if you're going to have a method actor playing a Shakespearean character, someone who's definitely like solar plexus focused, who always leads with his passions rather than his head, who's not particularly cerebral, that's gonna be Mark Antony. And even though it might feel like a weird fit if you're familiar with Brando's work, it actually does work quite well. His Mark Antony isn't, say, the Mark Antony you'd see out of a RADA graduate, but it's definitely a very believable, very likable Mark Antony. You 110% see why, that Roman crowd rallies behind him and does not rally behind Brutus, or is turned from Brutus. You understand how he's able to manipulate, isn't the right word, coax, or just lead in general. You get that sort of power and that passion from him and his character. So it's actually, for me, surprisingly solid casting in that regard. So if you are looking for a really solid, faithful adaptation of Julius Caesar, if you don't necessarily like all the bells and whistles of some of the more contemporary adaptations that really take interpretation to the forefront of things, if you want solid classical acting combined with a more method style, check out the 1953 adaptation of Julius Caesar. It is really very entertaining on both an academic and pure viewership level. I mean, I think anyone who likes solid classic film production would thoroughly enjoy this. So again, Julius Caesar, available on Hoopla Digital. Okay, speaking of more contemporary adaptations, I have another CleveNet Overdrive recommendation for you, and that is for the 2012 Chinese adaptation of Dangerous Liaisons. Now, Dangerous Liaisons is a 18th century novel that has been adapted many times. There was a 1950s French film adaptation. There was the rather classic adaptation from the 80s that starred Glenn Close, John Malkovich, Michelle Pfeiffer. It's very fitting and keeping with the original work, period piece and time and everything. You've got a 1990s, more teen-centric, dark adaptation, Cruel Intentions, and that, of course, starred Reese Witherspoon and Ryan Phillippe. I think that's where they met and eventually got together. That was actually probably the first adaptation that I remember seeing, even more so than, say, the classic 80s version. So after the 90s edition, there was also a South Korean period piece adaptation from 2003. Now, this 2012 adaptation is interesting in that while it still remains a bit of a period piece, they've changed the era. Not only, of course, are you dealing with a Chinese setting, but you're also dealing with a 1930s Manchuria. So you've got this backdrop of the oncoming war, and it's definitely almost its own character in a lot of ways, that sort of hanging concern. It's underneath all of this other plot that's going on, but there's definitely stuff going on. The Japanese are definitely coming into the country and starting to take over different regions. So that is in and of itself another layer, and a fascinating one at that. So with that element, you've also got your fairly traditional Dangerous Liaisons plot. You have an aging socialite who dares a former almost lover to seduce a well-reputed woman. And that's not even like, that part of the story isn't even that socialite's main goal. The socialite actually wants revenge on this very young girl who managed to steal her man. Um, that's part of almost all of these different plot lines. And in order to convince her former lover to seduce this very young girl, she plots to bet him that he can't seduce this super virtuous woman. And the bet is that if he does not succeed in seducing the virtuous character, he'll have to do the socialite's bidding, and she will then convince him to seduce this young girl. Already complicated, right? But by the way, complications in this plot are sort of the name of the game. You have all these twists and turns. Everything relies on something else. And it's kind of this house of cards. If something ceases to work, everything comes tumbling down. And that's kind of the center of this tale, regardless of what nation it's taking place in, regardless of what time period. That twisted, interconnected plotting, scheming, planning, that's all the real heart center, not that there's a heart center to this movie, of the story. So anyway, the aging socialite is also doing a lot of this just to, chase away the boredom, which makes all of it all the more menacing. You know what I mean? Like, she's plotting with people's lives. Being considered virtuous one moment and unvirtuous the next is essentially the end of your existence in this particular time period. So she's just toying with these people, playing God, and she is generally played by a ridiculously beautiful woman. So you've got this sort of malevolent force that is also extremely beautiful. There's just so many layers. It's very, very French. I feel like if you're familiar with French fiction and film, like, this storyline is just so indicative of French film and storyline in general. Okay. Everything comes to a head within this intricate plot, however, when the former lover starts to fall in love with his mark, with that virtuous woman. Originally, she's just another woman to seduce, because he's quite well known for being a playboy and for just running through girls. But the more he gets to know this virtuous young woman, the more he starts to think, less about the bet and more about actually forming a relationship with her. And that's that toppling of the cards starting right there. If he doesn't abide by these rules that the socialites set into motion, then how will everything turn out? And that's really the question of the whole story. The socialite Du Fenyu is played by Cecilia Chung, hugely famous Chinese actress. Shi Yifan is her former lover, and he is actually played by a South Korean actor, very, very famous South Korean actor, named Jang Dong-gun. I always find it fascinating when East Asia sort of trades performers around. Um, and then the virtuous woman is Du Fenyu, I think. Du Fenyu is played by the incomparable Shang-Chi. Uh, Shang-Chi is probably most famous for playing the young woman in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I've been a huge fan since then. I've followed anything that I can actually get with English subtitles in it, and she's always so marvelous. It doesn't matter if she's playing something like this, it's pretty heavily in the drama realm, if she's playing something more fantasy based, if she's playing like cute rom-com, she's just always so delightful on screen. And even with this complex, twisting, turning plot, the chemistry between these three actors is very, very strong. And that's, I think, what carries the film through some of the overly complicated elements and plot lines, because I do think it gets a little bit too tangled in places. I do think that there are adaptations that are on the whole a little bit more solid from the writing standpoint, but really this one is so worth it again because that chemistry between those three. I really, really enjoyed the performances. Honestly, I thought it was just as taut and riveting as, say, the 1980s version, which I think is probably next to this as far as having that really phenomenal chemistry between cast members. So if you're looking for something that has an interesting setting, again, that 1930s Manchuria with that looming Japanese presence, if you are looking for something with a really solid cast and a lot of chemistry within the main characters, and you're just intrigued by something that has a lot of plotting, scheming going on, check out the 2012 adaptation of Dangerous Liaisons on CleveNet Overdrive. Very, very interesting watch. Okay, moving right along to my Hoopla digital recommendations, we start things off with the incredible, the incomparable, the phenomenal Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is an Edward Albee play that I have seen many, many times. I absolutely love the dialogue. It is vicious. It is emotionally violent. It is, in a lot of ways, like the quintessential story of a failing marriage. And this screen adaptation encapsulates all that and then gives it like extra go gear with its two leads played by Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know if it's because they had their own incredibly volatile relationship or what, but they are so the two main characters. I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing watch. Like I was saying, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is the story of a crumbling marriage. It centers around George, who is a history professor, and his barely functioning alcoholic wife, Martha. And it all takes place on this one evening where he invites a colleague and his new wife to their house. It seems like it's going to be just a normal, dinner evening, a dinner party, small talk, schmoozing about work, that kind of thing. But things fall apart so fast. And what's incredible about it is the explosiveness that you get with the relationships, the rage, the anger, the devastation is all led up to by these teeny tiny moments, little nitpicky things that happen throughout the night. And it's amazing how very in it and in the moment Burton and Taylor are. And that's not to poo-poo on the performances of the young colleague and his wife. The young colleague, Nick, is played by George Segal. and his wife is played by Sandy Dennis. They do a very nice job. But just like in the play, those two are very secondary characters. Like, they could be silent for all of their import within the story. It really is George and Martha's tale. And Burton and Taylor definitely go all out in every single scene that they're in, whether they are screaming at one another, whether it's just this quiet underlying tension. There's always something happening between them. They are always interacting, even when they're not. and I think that is so hard to convey, whether it is the stage production or it's a screen adaptation. And that's why I think I love the movie so much. You're able to pinpoint all the little beats and all the little moments, and it all feels very, very organic. So if you are looking for a bombastic, huge, tragic drama that will absolutely pull you in, keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you check out Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It is an incredible adaptation of a phenomenal play, and you'll just be blown away by Burton and Taylor's performances. I mean, really, really, truly, they are what make this movie great. Okay, if you are in the mood for a film adaptation that has incredibly snappy, incredibly witty, incredibly speedy dialogue, if you are looking for something with a really phenomenal cast, and that's just a really fantastic adaptation in general, make sure you check out Glengarry Glen Ross on Hoopla. Glengarry Glen Ross is based on David Mamet's Pulitzer Prize winning play of the same name, and it centers around this group of really unscrupulous real estate brokers. Now, these guys are not nice guys. They are pretty terrible human beings in a lot of ways. And it's hard to sympathize with any of them, but they do have levels of that awfulness, if that makes any sense. You have a character named Shelley Levine, played by Jack Lemmon, and I would say he's probably the character that's easiest to be drawn to. He was once this really hotshot businessman. He had so much success and has just been in a slump for a very long time. He also has a daughter who's sick in the hospital. I mean, he's got problems. But these other guys, also played by ridiculous actors, you've got Ed Harris playing Dave Moss, who is very much a schemer. You've got Alan Arkin playing another highly unscrupulous, very me-centric character. You've got Alec Baldwin just playing this huge mammoth, I'm the man kind of jerk. He actually kind of represents the man. Not that they aren't all part of that cycle anyway, but yeah, Alec Baldwin is terrible in this. A terrible human being in this, I mean, you've just got some really, really solid, phenomenal performances. Oh, you've also got Al Pacino in all his bombastic glory, playing a liar, a schemer, a cheater. I mean, all of these guys are wretched, and yet somehow you still want to continue watching everything that happens to them. Like, I don't know if it's the fact that you end up wanting to see them get what's coming to them or what, but once you get invested in this storyline, you can't look away. And it doesn't matter if you're watching the movie or you're watching the play. I remember seeing the play done quite a few years ago and feeling exactly the same way, wondering, why do I care what happens to these vicious people? But you do. And I think it really is that sort of sense of comeuppance. You have ludicrously snappy dialogue. I mean, there are a couple really iconic scenes in the movie or the play, but in the movie in particular, that are quoted and cited over and over again in different websites, but also referenced in AFI productions and things like that. And there's just something about the way Mamet writes that everything feels crisp. It feels rapid fire, almost like being shot. Like some of the things the vicious things that characters say, it's almost physically battering. And it's uncomfortable, but again, very compelling. So if you are interested in a film that really is dialogue centric, because every word, every line is very, very vital to the story. Make sure you check out Glengarry Glen Ross. The acting is just so solid. I mean, top to bottom, the cast is of an incredible caliber. And then again, you've got that wicked smart script going on. So Glengarry Glen Ross, also available on Hoopla. Highly recommended. So moving from a recommendation about terrible people to a recommendation about two unbelievably incredible women. If you have not seen The Miracle Worker, you absolutely must. I'm talking about the adaptation starring Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke. It's available on Hoopla, and it is fantastic. Now, The Miracle Worker tells the story of Helen Keller, who was this young woman who became blind and deaf after suffering this awful fever as a very young child. She spent years of her life not being able to communicate with anyone, her mother, her father, anybody. She had no friends. It was just this blank slate of a universe, and she had no one who could teach her or help her how to start making those connections, until one day, as this sort of last chance before being sent essentially to a sanitarium, because that was just what they did during this era, she is put into contact with Annie Sullivan, who is this motivated teacher, who's also half blind. She has had successes in the past, and Annie Sullivan, played by the incomparable Anne Bancroft, has to somehow figure out a way to break through the wall to get to Helen. Because again, Helen is blind and deaf, and at this point in time, this particular era, they didn't really know how to bring a child that had no recollection or relationship to how to speak words or what sounds like, things like that. They had no way to bring them into the speaking and seeing world, and Sullivan manages to do that. She has to manage to do that. And, you know, for a large portion of the movie, Keller is fighting Sullivan tooth and nail because she's frustrated. She doesn't understand. She just knows that there's this person who wants something from her that she doesn't know how to give. And watching the two of them clash over and over again is both absolutely heartbreaking and ridiculously inspiring, because Sullivan just refuses to give up. And Bancroft is so good at imbuing everything with that fiery passion and that determination that you know she's going to have success. I mean, obviously this is based on Helen Keller's life. You know she does have success. But even in the context of like a film in general, like not a fictional film would be, you know that because she has this focus, this drive, and you know because Keller also has that in her own way, that they're going to figure out a way to find that success, to bridge that gap. And watching them do this on screen is so incredible. Both Bancroft and Duke won Oscars for their performances. So you know that they are absolutely watchable. I mean, there are definitely times when I've watched performances and thought, it's a little over the top for me. Like impassioned characters that you're just like, But these two somehow they sink into that perfect level of performance, and they both do it, and I just love this film. So if you're looking for something uh, that's absolutely inspirational but also just features two extraordinary performances from two women, check out The Miracle Worker. It is well worth the watch. Okay, I have one last recommendation for this week, and that is going to be Miss Julie from 1951 on our Canopy service. Now, Miss Julie is the film adaptation of the August Strindberg play of the same title, and this one is one of those sort of film adaptations that everybody has to see, because I really do think this is a fantastic adaptation. Now, the story of Miss Julie, it takes place in 19th century Sweden. You have this young, very beautiful girl who happens to be the daughter of a count. So she is of the upper class. But after, being a part of this world that she finds very sexist, very power hungry, conniving, she ends up falling in love with a servant boy. Now, here's where things get terrible. Servant boy seems like freedom to her, right? She sees in him everything that she doesn't get in her regular life, the freedom to not be worried about the eyes of everyone, to always have to practice and behave a certain way, except Sweden in the 19th century was very much a class system, but it was classist in every class. I mean, you had rules, that you had unwritten rules that you had to follow no matter what. And she sort of discovers these things, and the Julie character is constantly being surprised and shocked and horrified by the things that she sees or the situations she finds herself in. And it's really truly a tragic tale. um she falls in love with this servant, but the servant has his own belief system. He is incredibly sexist, also very classist, and these things kind of unfold as the story happens, and every time she sees another layer, you can see another piece of her hope falling away, and it's so sad. But the woman, Anita Bjork, who plays Julie, does such a good job of conveying that devastation, that slowly snowballing sadness. And when you get to the climax of the film, it's one of those moments that you've kind of you've seen coming. You know it's going to happen, but at the same time, it's still devastating. And I just think they do such a good job with the portrayal of all the characters. Ulf Palm is playing the servant that Julie falls in love with. She does have chemistry with him, but it's definitely something that she's built up in her own mind. And I just find it fascinating when you see characters like this, the characters that want to break from tradition, that want to buck the trend, and just can't manage to do it. And it works so well in this adaptation. They like I said, they do just such a good job of that tense devastation. So if you're looking for something that's not a happy movie, because this is definitely not a happy movie, but that does an incredible job of laying out the pieces to a tragic finale that has a really compelling female lead, that you do sympathize with, that you do kind of want to just give a hug, and I'm not a hugger, to throughout the story. Check out Miss Julie, the 1951 version, please. There have been many other adaptations, but definitely watch the 1951 one first. It's well acted, it's well written, the dialogue is really good. It is a Swedish film, so yes, you do have to deal with subtitles, but It is absolutely well worth dealing with the subtitles. So, so good. Again, Miss Julie, 1951 edition on Canopy. So, that is actually my very last recommendation for the week. And, as always, if you have a film that you know of that's been adapted from a stage play that you think people have to watch this, make sure you comment and let us know. There are so many strong adaptations out there. Cabaret, Chicago. I mean, there are many adaptations. So please, again, share all of those recs with us. If you have a request or a recommendation for a theme that we can cover in the future, please comment and let us know about that as well. With that, I'm going to close everything out. As always, thank you for tuning in this week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.